But can I just ask, is anybody here in the room involved in trying to get a new political movement or a new conversation going about what's happening in Ireland? You are. Vincent, did you stand for election in the United States at one stage?
7 times.
Right, okay. I thought you were familiar. And are you hopeful that this second republic can happen?
If the leaders of the country, not just in the political arena, but in every arena, including the media, change their priorities and their direction, absolutely yes. But if I could give a very quick example, in America, one of the most divisive issues in the 70s was busing children for integration, taking black children out of black neighborhoods, sending them to white neighborhoods. You can imagine what that did. There was a little town in Texas, Brownsville, where the leaders in that town, the religious, the political, and the members of the Chambers of Commerce voluntarily bused their white children into Mexican and black neighborhoods, and there was not a ripple of dissent. It was the most beautiful microcosm moment in the 70s American history, because the leaders took courage and came together, put their divisions apart, and that, my answer to your question is, if Ireland, the trade unions, and business comes together and puts their egos aside and looks for the national good, the answer is yes. If not, no.
It's nice to hear a note of hope.
I just want to say that in my life, there's plenty of hope for change. First of all, I give up on any idea of shame. I mean, that's where it came from. I don't feel ashamed. I feel very, very angry. The feeling that should be harnessed or moved, and what Jane Tudor is doing suits me very well to the New Republic. Anyway, my point is this: there is always hope for change. Because in my time, if you applied for planning permission and it was refused, the appeal was to the Minister for Local Government of the day. It was a direct political situation, which was changed through pressure of people saying it was for us in the future. And around the same time, again, in my own adult lifetime, you had this organisation called TACA, which supported Fianna Fáil. And a very good minister, intelligent guy who brought in free secondary education, said at the time that in respect, he was a minister for education, right? He had control over who would be appointed as architect on schools and colleges and so on. He said publicly that so far as he was concerned, a member of the party would be preferred to a non-member of the party, other things being equal. So we got these two architects. If you didn't join Fianna Fáil and TACA and support them, you didn't get a job. So we've left that kind of corruption behind. So what I feel is where we are now, we should try and get back to OTA, openness, transparency and accountability, which was a God phrase about 10 years ago. And to try, as Jane was saying, to start at that level. I mean, there's a danger of analysis paralysis. Start at the idea of where we can change things, and as Jane was saying, if in some way there's a Tea Party going, this new republic, to interface with the incoming new government and try and get something from them in respect of even small promises, such as that the appointments to state boards would be, the same as the judiciary, would be removed from the political arena and given to a committee. Like, if you were good enough to serve, it wouldn't be left to the minister to appoint you. And I say that as a person who has been appointed in the past by a Labour minister, if you forgive me for that. And so on. The other one is, the obvious one again, is if you're looking at legalised corruption, is the one that's already mentioned, where you're bringing the bacon home to the parish. So, and that, like, in a nutshell, as far as I'm concerned, I'd like to join an organisation, real or in the making, already there or in the making, where we could give some impetus to change and not get, as I say, paralysed by analysis forgive me for going on.
And I forgive you your state appointment, considering the work you did for Ireland on the bringing in divorce. The lady at the back was asking whether we should have electoral reform or political reform. Maybe a bit of both.
Yeah, I think electoral reform is a small part of political reform. But, you know, we heard there about TACA. As part of my research, when Ballymun was built, the guy who put in the lifts was a member of TACA. The guy who did the plumbing was a member of TACA. The brickie was a member of TACA. The guy who did the electricity. The whole place was totally stitched up. You couldn't get a job building in Ballymun unless you were a member of TACA. Now, it's probably the introduction of tendering and the EU and so on that has stopped all of that. So, you know, as a lot of people have pointed out, sort of the corruption, it isn't just confined to the political system. But I suppose you have to start somewhere. And as far as I can see, it's as good a place as any to start. But as I said before, I really don't think that electoral reform is the answer. It could be a small part of the answer. But, you know, changing the electoral system isn't going to change the culture of people who want clientelism. It isn't going to change the culture of people who want their ministers to deliver. It isn't going to change the culture of a public service that doesn't necessarily operate with evidence-based decision making. You know, we could fix. We don't need to have ministers delivering and fixing up schools or sports facilities, or environment ministers making sure that the roads in their constituency are better than the roads in anybody else's constituency. If we actually had rules in the public service and we had evidence, the Department of Education in this country doesn't even have a database of all of the schools. It can't actually tell you how many 19th century primary schools there are or how many 20th century ones. It can't tell you how many three-room schools there are or how many 10-room schools. It just doesn't have the evidence. There's, you know, since 1988 there have been expert groups calling for this, but there's some sort of paralysis in the department that stops this happening. And of course, if you have evidence, it means you can make sensible decisions. If you don't have evidence, it means, of course, that you can make ad hoc decisions and allocate funds where you like. You know, and I don't think fixing the electoral system is going to fix those sort of problems. I think we really need to go to the heart of it. And if you look at the moment, the Icelandic people have who obviously went through a crisis in many ways similar to our own, except they didn't have the euro. But, you know, they have a constitutional convention where ordinary people are sitting on it and they're rewriting their constitution. Now, I know every lawyer in the room, every lawyer you ever talk to will always say, don't rewrite the constitution, because, of course, there's so much precedent built up and, you know, they don't want to start again. And maybe, I don't know, like if people are going to do it, the lawyers can come in and make their case for keeping the parts of the constitution where that sort of thing is built up. But I think certainly in terms of the sort of the political infrastructure and the institutions, there is a big case that there ought to be a citizens' assembly, that we ought to follow the Icelanders and sit down and look at what has got us into this, what we want to be as a country and how we want to get out of it, and is there anything we can do to change that. And really, I think that's where we want to go. So that's political reform, with possibly electoral as a small part of it.
Thanks very much. John, would you mind just addressing the point about sort of ethics training for people in public life and administration, a sort of TD school? Would that be a good way of fighting corruption?
Well, I've just been doing a little bit of reading. I'm reading the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle, and he says just give up on them and start afresh. I think Plato says something similar. I think we do need to radically transform our values or reassess and articulate a new set of values and familiarise ourselves with the whole notion of virtue. but I think it'll go way beyond that. As I said, I reassert the belief that I think we need to refine a sense of shame, not so much that ordinary citizens should feel a sense of shame for what their political leaders have done, but that it should become a standard, or it should become in itself, righteous shame should become a virtue. We shouldn't avoid blame. We shouldn't avoid the need sometimes to be angry.